listening to the Metal Command Podcast.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to the Metal Command Podcast. Tony here with you. Today, I'm really excited to talk about my favorite subject, Helloween. That's right, my favorite band of all time. Many of you know I have a history with them. However, I'm here to talk specifically about these remasters, which are absolutely awesome. They just came out with the first three, and I'm going to go in depth on these, give you my thoughts on the actual albums themselves, and I'm going to talk about their significance, especially these three records, for quite a few reasons, actually. But before I get into that, if you do like what you see and hear on this show, please hit the subscribe button, hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video. I'm interested to hear what many of you think of these albums, and if you bought the remasters, let me know what you think of them. I'm curious as to what everybody's opinion is on these. And if you are on any other form of social media, by all means, please give me a follow there. Now, let's talk about these records a little bit, because I think these are three of the most important albums that have ever come out in the heavy metal scene itself. And I believe Noise Records is a record label that is just as important in Europe as Megaforce and, labels like Metal Blade were here in the USA. Now, why do I say that? Well, obviously, Helloween is a band that helped create an entire subgenre of the metal scene, namely power metal, especially European power metal, because pretty much if you ask most bands in Europe that came up, that were, grew up in the 80s, that listened to Helloween, they will reference Keeper of the Seven Keys Parts 1 and 2 as two of the more influential albums ever put out. They will just do that because these albums had a lot of influence on a lot of musicians. Walls of Jericho did too. A lot of people don't give that album enough credit, but Walls of Jericho is an album that also is pretty widely, mentioned when it comes to having a big influence on speed metal and power metal. That's just how it is. Noise Records also was a label that had a lot of great bands that are still around today. You had bands like Creator, Gravedigger, Rage, Running Wild. I'm a big fan of the band Scanner. Skyclad was on that label for a number of years. I mean, so there were a lot of very good and very important bands on Noise Records, just like there were on Megaforce and Metal Blade. So that was Noise Records was kind of the label if you were a heavy metal band in Europe. I mean, you had neat records in Britain, don't get me wrong, but Noise obviously made their mark, and obviously you had these three albums as the result of that. So just so you also know, there are going to be 9 remasters total that will be coming out. These are the first 3. These came out at the end of July. At the end of August this month, 2024, you are going to have Pink Bubbles Go Ape, Chameleon, and you are also going to have Master of the Rings. And at the end of September, you are going to have The Time of the Oath, Better Than Raw, and for the first time ever, really reissued as an expanded edition, Metal Jukebox. And I will go more into depth on that one when that comes out. But let's just say I have a lot of really fond memories of that album, which consists of covers, which I'll get into later on down the road. Now, people will always ask, why do bands always do this? Why is everybody reissuing everything? Is it to make money? Are they going to make a little bit of money on it? Let's be honest, yes. Are they going to be making millions and thousands of dollars off of these? Probably not. There just isn't a big margin on physical product. And keep in mind, too, physical product only accounts for like 14% of all revenue generated in the music industry these days. It is definitely not what it once was, say, 30 years ago. And if you want to watch a great documentary on why, you go to Paramount Plus, and there is a documentary called How Music Got Free. It gives you a whole story as to how the music industry basically fell apart. There's also, videos on here where I talk a lot about that, and you can go to various podcasts and interviews on this channel where that gets talked about. But now it's time to talk about these 3 remasters and these albums specifically. Let's talk about Walls of Jericho right here. And let me show you some of this because, this is the Walls of Jericho packaging. This is what it looks like. Really cool stuff, actually. It has 2 CDs. I'll show you one of the CDs here. what I like about the packaging, it just feels better, feels nicer. You know, this is what the CD looks like. All the CDs are pretty much painted on. They don't have that like cheap etching like the expanded editions did. Not only that, but with these remasters, I think they sound a little better than the original expanded editions that were remastered. So I prefer the sound. Again, the content, it really isn't any different as far as the bonus tracks go. But again, you don't have these, or you want the albums, you want the albums, and you don't like the sound as much on the expanded editions, you can get these. So it's interesting the way they did Walls of Jericho, because traditionally any CD versions of this or reissues, you always had the first 5 songs on the CD. They were always the mini LP songs, like Starlight, Murderer, and Victim of Fate. And you have the Walls of Jericho album afterwards, and then typically the last song would be Judas. They didn't do that. What they did was they put the Walls of Jericho album first, and I'll put it up there so you guys can see it. Judas, the Judas EP with the 2 live B-sides are on there. And then the second disc, you have the mini LP and the rest of the bonus tracks. Now, what bonus tracks are on here? Obviously, as I just said, Ride the Sky Live and Guardians Live. Those are the original B-sides for the Judas EP. And then, after the mini LP on the second disc, you have the 2 songs they had on the Noise death metal sampler, Ernst for Life and Metal Invaders. And then you have the remixes of Murderer and Ride the Sky, which originally appeared on a compilation called Treasure Chest. Now, as far as Walls of Jericho is concerned as an album, obviously when Helloween came out, they had the mini LP, and then you had Judas, and then the full length. It makes sense. That was a completely different era of the band. Kai Hansen was singing. There was no Michael Kiske. But the thing about Walls of Jericho is this. A lot of people still think this is one of the best albums the band had ever put out. Nobody sounded like them. Like, if you go back to 1985 and 1986, nobody had a sound quite like Helloween. It was fast. It was melodic. They were just doing something that a lot of other people really weren't. You did have a twin guitar attack with Judas Priest and Maiden and all these bands, but nobody sounded like Helloween when this came out. And obviously, as we know, Kai Hansen sounds a lot better singing when he started singing in Gamma Ray in 1995. But this is this is a pretty young, very talented, enthusiastic band that put this album out. I mean, they really did. And there really wasn't anything that sounded like them at the time, as I just said. Now, there are many songs on here that have remained in this band's set for a long time. I'll give you some examples. How Many Tears has pretty much been played at practically every show they've ever played. Regardless of who was singing in the band, who was in the band at the time, that song has always been played for the most part. It's interesting because now they play songs like Victim of Fate. They will play songs like, Ride the Sky, especially with the lineup they have now with Kai being back in there. They do play a lot of those songs. Interestingly enough, they played Murderer, for example, was part of the set during the Rabbit Don't Come Easy album. And it was interesting listening to Andy Darris sing that because I always like when they play Walls of Jericho stuff live, too. It always goes down well, regardless who's singing. But I think they've done a tremendous job with this reissue, and this album, in my opinion, is very, very important and still pretty influential to a lot of bands from Europe and here in the States, actually. The original label that put it out in the States was Combat Records. I actually have a copy of the original Combat issue of like the mini LP and Walls of Jericho. And overall, it is still, considered one of the band's best albums. Where do I rank it? I'll be honest with you. I probably have it somewhere in the middle. Is it my favorite album by them? No. But it's still a very fun listen. It's still very good. And all the bonus material here is awesome. So let's talk next about Keeper of the Seven Keys, Part 1. So as we see here, this is it. Kind of show you some of the stuff in here, as you see. And as far as bonus tracks go, you got Victim of Fate, the re-recorded version. That was actually a B-side for the Dr. Stein single for Keeper of the Seven Keys. Part 2, you have the remix of Starlight, which pretty much has Michael Kiske singing on it. That was a B-side on the Future World single. You have the alternate version of Little Time, which I believe was there. And then you have the edited version of Helloween. Kind of unremarkable, but that was the version they played on MTV when they recorded the video. And during this time, of course, they played on the Headbangers Ball Tour with Grim Reaper and Armored Saint back in 1987 when this album came out. So what do I think of it? Well, number one, it is a top 5 Helloween album for me. It really is. If I were to give you a top 5 right now, it would definitely be the new self-titled album. It would be Better Than Raw. I would have Keeper 1. Keeper 1 would definitely be in that conversation as well. I would have Keeper 2 in that top 5. And then, you know, when it comes to the 5th album, now I haven't, obviously they're making a new album now. So if I like that one, it may be in the top 5. I don't know. But, you know, my 5th album would definitely be Seven Sinners. So those are the albums that I absolutely love. And it's really hard because it is my favorite band of all time. I like all of them. But if I had to pick a top 5 now, it would be them. So, but this album was very important. And I'm going to explain why. You know, there's a video I recorded where I went in some interviews and we talked about Helloween, and I said there's 4 major events in the band that when they happened, it really moved the band forward. And one of those events was getting Michael Kiske. Because when Michael Kiske joined the band, he's obviously a much better singer than Kai Hansen. And Michael Kiske took this band to a different level with his voice. I mean, the music sounded different. They were able to compete with bands like Queensryche. I mean, Michael Kiske, and he was like 18 or 19 when he joined the band. This band really took off when this album came out. I mean, people around now probably don't realize it, but this is probably one of the most important albums in the band's career, possibly the most important, because this launched them into a different realm. It really did. Not only in popularity, but musically. So I'm going to be honest with all of you folks that this reissue is great. This is a classic. To me, this is just as classic as anything that's ever come out in the history of heavy metal, whether it's Dio's Holy Diver or Black Sabbath, anything Black Sabbath put out. This is an important record. Some people may call blasphemy on that, but it is what it is. And Helloween, this is where they made their name, right here with this album. Now, compared to Keeper 2, I like this one a little bit better, but overall, this is the album that really established the band. So now we go to Keeper of the Seven Keys, Part 2. So here's what's great about this. A lot of classics on this. And again, on Keeper 1, Future World, they still play it. Tale That Wasn't Right, they still play it. They played I'm Alive on the live album, the United Alive album. But they still play quite a few songs off of this album. Keeper 2, a little bit different. So let's talk about Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 2. This was a great follow-up to Keeper Part 1. They went on another U.S. tour. They toured with Anthrax and Exodus. An interesting pairing, but they did tour the U.S. with those two bands. This album opened up a lot of doors for this band and really established them. It was a great follow-up. The song Keeper of the Seven Keys and Eagle Fly Free, 2 of the best songs that Michael Weikath has ever written. And again, taking a look, again, really cool stuff. That's the packaging. I think it's great. Now let's talk about the bonus tracks. And there is a little bit of a difference between this and the original expanded edition. You have the entire album. You have Save Us. That, believe it or not, that did not come out on the original European issue of the album. It came out on the US edition, and it was also a B-side on both of the singles. Basically, I Want Out and Dr. Stein. It was a B-side on those singles as well, depending on which version of the single you bought. You have the song Savage, which was a B-side, Living Ain't No Crime, which was a B-side, and you have Don't Run for Cover, which was a B-side. Ironically, Dr. Stein, from what I understand, was originally intended as a B-side, but it got released on the album, and the rest is history. So, but this was a great follow-up. Now, one thing I wish they would do, and I don't know if the band has much of a say in this or not. I can ask them at some point. I would love a reissue of Live in the UK, otherwise known as I Want Out Live in the US and Keepers Live in Japan. I think a reissue of that live EP is long overdue. I also think a reissue of High Live, the album that came out after Time of the Oath, the live album, is long overdue. And it would be nice to have them both on. So these are the 3 albums and the 3 remasters that have come out. Again, 3 of the most influential albums, in my opinion, in the history of the metal scene. It's really hard to deny that. And again, these guys shaped an entire subgenre of the heavy metal scene. So that's pretty much all I have for you today. If you do like these, I want to hear what you think. What do you think of these remasters? Do you like them? And what do you think of these albums? Like, where do you see them, within the confines and the history of the heavy metal scene? Interested in your thoughts? Leave a comment below. Thanks for watching. Stay metal.